So, is this a food plant or a decoration plant? I asked, adjusting my grip on the clear case as I walked. Or do we know? G flicked an antenna. Not my business. He faced forward, businesslike, but with bug eyes that size, there was no need to turn his head. Paint looked up from elbow height. I think it's food, she said, giving the package a discerning stare. The alien flowers were a similar orange to her scales. I've seen these at markets before. They're expensive. Makes sense, I said. The private estate that we'd been walking across for some time now was covered in the most rigidly cultivated berry bushes I'd ever seen. Even the pathway was paved in thick moss, pruned to within an inch of its life. The owner of this place had both money and a fondness for plants, especially edible-looking ones. A berry dropped to the path ahead of us, then was snapped up by something that darted out of the undergrowth. I couldn't tell you if it was an animal or a robotic gardener. Don't ask the client, G said. Keep that curiosity to yourself. Best behavior and extreme politeness. Right, I agreed. So, any tips on what that means for this particular culture? I haven't met them before. G walked stiffly, with only his shiny purple legs moving. I haven't either. I blinked. What? I thought you were the expert. I looked to Paint, but she was shaking her head. None of the crew has met them in person, she said. I think this whole area usually gets deliveries from a specific company or individual or something. Anyways, it's not us. We're the last-minute replacement. Uh-huh. I held the bio-shielded case full of expensive plants a little tighter. So they're rich, probably important, and if we do anything to displease them, we'll never make another delivery in this part of the system again. G clicked a pincher arm. Accurate. Paint spread her scaly hands in what was probably a calming gesture. It shouldn't be that bad, she said. We'll just hand the package over quietly and not make a fuss. We know some things about the client. Do tell, I said. I wasn't up front when the captain took the call. Paint ticked off points by counting on her knuckles. The client is the only one who lives here, though she throws big parties. She didn't seem to like talking more than necessary. She has very fancy fur patterns, prey species. Paint looked up a bit guiltily. I misses the name of the species, but they eat plants, and evolved with some big predators that aren't a problem anymore. Captain Sunlight said so. G made a quiet noise that I interpreted as confidence that they wouldn't have been a problem for him anyways. So I guess we'll be polite by keeping quiet and not making any sudden movements, I said. Then I looked at G, with his shiny exoskeleton and natural blade arms. If she looks afraid of you, hang back. G scoffed but paused to let Paint and me get a single step ahead. We reached an archway woven with multicolored vines and dangling pea pods. The hedges on either side were crisply trimmed to an absurd degree, and through it was a sprawling meadow of lounging spots, fountains, and flowering trees. Dozens of locals socialized there in absolute silence. I hadn't heard a thing aside from the fountains. I froze at the archway with Paint and G right beside me. A couple of the closest partygoers glanced our way, then ignored us with body language that felt pretty rude, honestly. They all had elaborately patterned fur, mostly spots and swirls in the gold to brown range, proportions that seemed just as comfortable on all fours as on two. Tall ears like many a prey animal that I'd known, very mobile and expressive, speaking a language of tilts and twitches that I could only guess at. Big eyes. Paint whispered, "That's her by the big fountain, with the starburst swirl patterns." Which? Oh, there. You're sure? Those definitely were some fancy patterns. Did she get her fur dyed? And the cushy spot surrounded by red berries did seem like a place of honor. Yes, I saw her on the call, Paint said firmly. Oh, and that one too. The captain said they're having some sort of feud. She pointed at an especially bright-furred partygoer who was approaching the host. I shifted uneasily. Why isn't the captain doing this delivery? I muttered. Busy, said G. Paint sighed. Busy? But look, I think they made up. We should be clear to approach. The golden blonde local had strolled over to within a few lengths of the host, then flopped down to lounge in the sun, looking just as relaxed as anyone there. Anyone but the host. I saw her nostrils flare, and thought of rabbits. Wait, I said urgently, holding out a hand. Paint and G stopped. That might be I'm a happier rabbit than you move. A what? G said, just as the host scrambled to her feet with an angry thump to the ground. Every head there whipped around to watch. The blonde offender was also getting to her feet, but not fast enough. The host tackled her into a vicious tumble of fur and angry screeching. Others dashed over, but the fight ended quickly, and the offender was ejected from the party. A half-dozen others escorted her towards the archway with tense body language of their own. We were still standing there like idiots. Paint and I jumped to one side and G to the other, letting the procession pass. Once they had, everyone was looking at us instead. Not my best entrance. But here goes, I thought, as I stepped forward with the plant held front and center. I heard Paint and G fall in behind me. There was an unnerving amount of silent staring as we approached, but nothing outright hostile, and nobody seemed afraid of G. Good enough. The host of the party was back on her mossy cushion, plucking berries and eating them one at a time with an air of deliberate haughtiness. She'd smoothed her fur, though there were a few damp spots. She looked past me as I set down the case. Normally, I would have said something cheerful to the client at this point. A friendly greeting, maybe a compliment or two, but this time I just held out the ID pad. With hardly a glance, she pressed her delicately clawed hand onto the screen. The beep of confirmation felt loud. I nodded, stood smoothly, then backed up a couple paces before turning away fully. The three of us made our careful way back through the archway. "Whew," I whispered once we were out of sight. All the friendliness of a firing squad. G walked ahead, muttering about mammals and unnecessarily complicated social rituals. "I've seen worse," I told him. "This was just a bit of passive-aggressive ego drama." G waved an arm in disdain. I didn't comment on the kind of ego drama that he himself was fond of. "I'm just glad we didn't walk out into the middle of all that," Paint said. "Seriously," I agreed. "Might have dropped the package. And then what would we do?" "Pee, scream, and run," Paint declared. I thought of that many gnawing teeth aimed in our direction. "Yeah, probably." I held up a hand and pointed out a tiny pale scar. "I got bit by a rabbit once. Well, more than once, but this one left a mark. She was much like these guys, just a lot smaller. Every inch the princess, mind you, but I have known some very nice rabbits, too." I told Paint comforting stories on the walk back to the landing pad, with G pretending not to listen, and both of us pretending that we didn't notice.